कल मैंने पूना पैक्ट गांधी और अंबेडकर नामक विषय पर अपने के आर्टिकल का एक पार्ट 30 मिनट का आपके समक्ष रखा था। उसी पार्ट को मैं आज आगे बढ़ाना चाहता हूँ। Not only did Ambedkar regard the relationship of superiority and inferiority between the different castes as a basic to Hinduism, but he also believed that it was incapable of being transformed into an egalitarian social bond. Indeed, in speculating about the possibilities of reform within Hindu society, Ambedkar observed that since the caste order was underpinned and legitimized by the Shastric literature of Hinduism, it was virtually impossible to conceive of the situation where Hindus would cut themselves adrift from their spiritual heritage and reshape their society into one sustained by the liberal principles of the 20th century. The Mahatma's attempt at wedding the moral horizon of Hinduism and obliging Orthodox Hindus to adopt a new social outlook was, according to Ambedkar, doomed to failure. This was so because Hindu philosophy of Hindu social thought rested upon the belief that men were inherently unequal and that they ought to seek satisfaction in the different vocations and social hierarchies wherein they had been located through the working of their karma. As Ambedkar observed in the essay entitled Annihilation of Caste, unlike the Mahatma, there are Hindu leaders who are not content merely to believe that follows at how many Brahmins who break caste every day will preach against the caste and against the Shastras. For the honest Brahman preaching against the caste and Shastras because his practical instinct and moral consciousness cannot support a conviction in them. There are hundreds who break caste and temples upon the Shastras every day, but who are the most fanatic upholders of the theory of caste and the sanctity of Shastras. Why this duplicacy? Because they feel that if the masses are emancipated from the yoke of caste, they would be a means to the power and prestige of Brahman in the class. The dishonesty of this intellectual class, who would deny the masses that fruits of their thinking in the most disgraceful phenomenon. The Hindus, in the word of Matthew Arnold, are wandering between the two words, one deed and other powerless to be born. What are they to do? The Mahatma, to whom they appeal for the guidance, does not believe in thinking and can therefore give no guidance which can be said to stand the test of experience. The intellectual classes to whom the masses took for the guidance are either too dishonest, are too indifferent to educate them in the right direction. We are indeed witness to the great tragedy. In the face of this tragedy, all one can do is to lament, to say, such be thy leaders, O Hindus. Ambedkar perception of Hindu society and of the value which informed its Brahmanical leadership made it obvious to him that it would be impossible for the untouchables to seek redemptions within the social framework which condemned them to so lowly a position in the evidence which he gave before the Southborough Committee in 1919. He advanced the view that the like Muslim and Sikh and Christian, the untouchable too, should be treated as a distinctive community in any future constitutional arrangement for the subcontinent. Indeed, to enable the untouchable to exercise an effective voice in the representative conflict being created at the various level in the polity. They should be given the right to vote in separate electorate. In the untouchable, if the untouchables were denied such a right, if they were given nothing more substantial than reserved seat in Hindu constituencies, then they would be unable to elect a representative who could voice their true interests. A leadership created through the provision of reserved seats in Hindu constituency would be so much under the influence of the dominant upper class that it would be unable to perform the task speaking for the untouchable. Ambedkar further argued that since the untouchable were deprived community educationally as well as their access of economic resources, the condition of franchise for them would be different from those caste Hindus and others. Untouchables with relatively small holding in property or with relatively modest educational credentials are to be given the right to vote in order to enfranchise a sufficiently large number of such lowly individuals. Thus, by the second decade of 20th century, Ambedkar had developed very distinctive view of the place which the untouchables would hold in any constitutional arrangements in India, and his view of what was appropriate for the untouchables in a free polity stood at complete variance with the views entertained by the Gandhi on his crucial aspect of the national regeneration. That conflicting view of the Gandhi and Ambedkar on the possibility of transforming Hindu society from within created the major crisis during the political deliberations which preceded the Government of India Act 1935. As in well known at the first round table conference convened to discuss the future constitution of India, notwithstanding the absence of any leader from Indian National Congress, the assembled delegates from British India as well as from princely India took the momentous decision that the growth of the nationalism in the subcontinent necessitated the creation of an all India federal government free of British control. The assembled delegates also took the view that the provinces of British India as well as the princely states should seek membership of such a federal polity as its autonomous constituents, and that the various minorities, particularly the great Muslim community, should extend their loyalty to the federal polity in return for the constitutional guarantees and prerogatives of the franchise that would be safeguard their political interest as well as their cultural identity, as while it was relatively easy to secure a consensus on the describability of the federal from the governance of India. The minority problem posed insurmountable difficulties which proved difficult of resolution during the course of conference. In the meanwhile, the Viceroy Lord Irwin took the initiative in persuading the leaders of the Indian National Congress who were engaged in the movement of civil disobedience against the British government to participate in the second round table conference, which was due to assemble in London towards the close of 1931. The ground of such participation was prepared through a series of meetings between Mahatma and the Viceroy. As the result of this symmetry, Gandhi called off the civil disobedience movement and indicated his willingness to participate in the constitutional deliberations after consulting his colleagues within the Congress. Immediately after the conclusion of the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, as it is termed, the Mahatma attended to Karachi session of the Indian National Congress. In the Karachi, his understanding with the Viceroy was endorsed and he was chosen as the sole representative of the Congress to the second round table conference. Moreover, this responsibility was bestowed on Gandhi on the understanding that he would work for the constitution wherein the minority Muslim, Sikh and Christians were assured that they would be consulted on every issue affecting their materials and cultural interest. At the same time, as the provisions of the separate communal electorates, which has created to the much tension and strife in the political system, would stand concealed. Gandhi attended the second round table conference in London as the most outstanding political leader from India. Pitted against the Mahatma in this conference were numerous British leaders of distinctions, as well as fellow Indian handpicked by the imperial authorities to represent this counterpoise to nationalism, constituencies of class, community and religion, upon whom the British relied to retard the constitutional progress of India. In the memorable speech before the Federal Structure Committee, Gandhi spelled out the substantive issue facing assembled delegates of British and India, in terms which admitted of very little ambiguity. The Indian National Congress would be represented was, if I am not mistaken, the oldest political organization we have in India. It is what it means, national. It represents the particular community, no particular class, no particular interest. Its claim represents all Indian interest on the classes. Above all, the Congress represents in its essence the dumb, semi-starved million scattered over the length and breadth of the land of its 7 lakh villages no matter whether they came from what is called British India or what is called of Indian India. Given so powerful a support base among the people, Gandhi argued that demand of the Congress of Purna Swaraj or complete independence was the only legitimate solution of the Indian problem. Moreover, the Congress could be trusted to protest the interest of all classes and communities in the country, just as, just as it would also be relied upon the sustain and the spokesman of an independent polity, a relationship of equality between Great Britain and India within the framework of the British Empire. If the firm undertaking of the fundamental issue of freedom was forthcoming from His Majesty's government, Gandhi argues other questions of relations between the federal polity and its constituent members are the manner in which the rights of minorities would be protected could be resolved without much difficulty. The British government, needless to say, entertained a very different view of the manner in which the Round Table Congress could proceed the business of framing a new constitution of India. As Ramsay MacDonald, the Prime Minister, told the assembled delegates, the real challenge before them lay in devising a system or representation whereby power could be equability shared by different classes, communities, and religious groups before the shape of an independent all India polity was hammered out. The Prime Minister's statement immediately prompted Ambedkar to put before the Minorities Committee a document setting out the quantum of representation that was fair of equable of the untouchable in the different popularity elected legislatures. In doing so, Ambedkar also challenged the Mahatma assertion and the Congress represented all classes and communities in India, not excluding the untouchables. Yet at this juncture, there was no mention of separate electorates for the untouchables by Ambedkar. However, when the member of the minorities committee took a decision slightly later to resolve the vexed question of minority participation in any future system of representative government through the informal discussion between themselves, the problem between the extremely complicated one, the representatives of the Muslim, the Indian Christians, the Anglo-Indian and European, and the untouchable, now put before the Prime Minister a joint purpose proposal, not only setting out the quantum of representation adequate for their constituents in different legislatures, but also demanding on their behalf the right of to elect their spokesman through the agency of separate electorates. In the communicating the so-called minorities pact to the member of minorities committee, Ramsay MacDonald observed that in the absence of any agreement between the representative of the different minorities, different minority on the one hand and the spokesman of the Congress on the other, he would be obliged to take note of its provisions in any decision which His Majesty government took regarding the constitutional future of India. Gandhi saw in Ramsay MacDonald declares a clear reflection of divide and rule policy, which apparently guided His Majesty government in the relations with the nationalist movement of India. The very composition of the Indian delegation to the Round Table Conference, whose members were nominated by the British government, Gandhi observed assured that no agreement would be reached. The solution, according to the Mahatma, lay in hammering out of fundamentals of the new constitution expeditiously without letting the deadlock in the minorities committee paralyze of the work of the conference as whole. The policy of permitting special interest within the Indian society, whether they were Muslim or Sikh or other minorities, to hold back the progress of the entire country would hardly be looked upon as equitable policy. Above all, it was the possibility of creating separate electorates for the untouchables and demand voiced in the minorities pact, which Ramsay MacDonald has apparently endorsed, which pained the Mahatma most of all. Such provisions could only be advocated by those who Gandhi observed, who were ignorant social conditions in India or ill disposed towards the country. Let the committee and let the whole world know that today there is a body of Hindu reforms who are pleased to remove this blood untouchability, stated the Mahatma Gandhi in his ringing tone. We do not want to our register and our census untouchable classified as a separate class. Sikh may remain as such in perpetuity. So many Mohammedans, so many Europeans will untouchables remain untouchables in perpetuity. I would far rather that Hinduism died than that untouchability lived. I do not mind untouchable if they so desire being converted to Islam or Christianity. I should tolerate that, but I cannot possibly tolerate what is in stare of Hinduism if there are two divisions set forth in the village. Those who speak of political right of untouchables do not know their India, don't know how Indian society is today constituted. And therefore, I want to say that all the emphasis that I can command, that if I was the only person to resist the thing, I would resist it with my life. The Gandhi emotively charged the delegations, reflected his determinations to resist the all cost of delinking of the untouchables from the mainstream of Hindu society was not uttered lightly. Become apparent before long of the concert. On the return to the India from the second round table conference, the Mahatma was promptly put behind the bar. From his prison cell, his Yerwada Pune, the fate of untouchables, who he was soon going renamed the Harijan, or the children of God, continued to exercise his mind. In the spring of 92, therefore addressed the communications to Sir Samuel Hore, the Secretary of State of India, reiterating what he had said earlier before the Minorities Committee of the second roundtable conference, and the formally recording the decision, as was his practice as a true satyagrahi, the fast unto death. In the event of the creation of the separate electorate for the untouchables of any future constitution of India. The release by the Ramsay MacDonald of the Communal Award in 16 August 1932 confirmed the worst fear of Mahatma. The constitution which the British government proposed to create of India observed the Prime Minister could not turn a blind eye onto diversity of communities and the depth of social cleavages within the subcontinent. It was appropriate in such a situation of protest the interest of specific social groups through the device of separate electorates, and such a facility would henceforth also be extended to the untouchable. In the recognition of the demand put forward their spokesman, beside the conferring about the untouchable the right to vote with other members of Hindu community in what were defined as a general constituencies. The Prime Minister therefore also created a number of special seats filled from depressed classes electorates in the area where these voters chiefly prevail. The actual number of such seats created by award was 71. The only glimmer, the hope lay to students also was the Ramsay MacDonald that its committees concerned came agreement between themselves. Then the British government would be prepared to substitute the terms and condition of such an agreement for the term of condition spelled out its award. For the Mahatma, however, the die was cast. Soon after announcement the communal award, he formally communicated the Prime Minister his decision to undertake on 28th September 1932 fast unto death, unless the provision separate electorate for the untouchables was cancelled before the date. Thank you very much.